You woke up, but why do you still feel this absence? Why, after searching for a cure for so long, after diving into self-knowledge, into silence, into the words of Rumi, what remains inside is still an echo, an emptiness that doesn't go away, a pain that no one sees. Maybe you think you're making a mistake again. Maybe you're blaming yourself for not being able to feel the peace that everyone promises after awakening. But what if I told you that this feeling, this absence, is exactly what should be happening? Rumi said, "You were born with wings. Why do you still crawl through life? You don't crawl because you are weak. You crawl because you are still saying goodbye to what no longer serves you, but which still hurts to let go. You feel this absence because your soul no longer feeds on what once satisfied it. Empty people, noisy distractions, relationships based on need. Now everything seems small, superficial, distant, and when you get away from the noise, what's left is silence. And silence sometimes is scary. It shows who you are, when no one is looking. Awakening is not about feeling cured. To awaken is to begin to see, and seeing often hurts more than living asleep. You woke up, but why do you still feel this emptiness that won't go away? Because emptiness is the space where your soul is beginning to be born again. Because the absence you feel is the absence of your old self, the one who sabotaged himself to be loved, the one who screamed for attention because he didn't know how to welcome himself, the one who confused love with emotional crumbs. This pain is not a setback. It is a sign that something is being pulled out with deep roots. It is the silent cry of a soul that finally refuses to continue pretending. What if awakening is not the end of pain, but the beginning of an even deeper absence? Many speak of awakening as an explosion of light, of consciousness, of freedom, but few tell you about the darkness that comes next. Few people talk about mourning what you are no longer, but still misses it. Yes, there is a strange longing that arises when you wake up, missing something you don't even want anymore, but which still inhabits their memories, their gestures, their fears. You may be living that moment right now, that exact point where you no longer fit into your old life but still doesn't know how to live the new. This absence that accompanies you is not spiritual weakness. It is the sacred interval between what has died and what will yet flourish. Do not look outside for what can only be cured inside. Rumi. And maybe you're looking where there are no more answers. In messages that don't come, in people who are gone, in stories that you have already rewritten 1,000 times in your mind, but which no longer belong to you. Maybe all you need right now is not to fill that void, but I felt it completely. Let her say what she came to say, because this absence has a message, and when you hear, nothing will be the same again. Have you ever felt this way too? That silent presence that seems to visit you at night? That invisible weight that tightens your chest even when everything is right on the outside? If this touches you, don't run away. This video is for you. Stay with me until the end, because what comes next could be the key you didn't know you were looking for. If any part of this absence has ever visited you in silence, if you recognized yourself in this pain that no one sees, comment below. I feel, but I don't run away anymore. This simple act can be the beginning of your healing, because writing is recognizing, and recognizing is the first step to transformation. Leave your like, not as an automatic gesture, but as a sign that this content really touched you. It helps this video reach more souls who, like you, are also waking up and feeling lost along the way. And if you feel like this channel speaks to parts of you that no one else sees, subscribe. Because here, we don't just wake up, we cross. Together. You sought healing, delved into spirituality, tried to reconnect. But even after the awakening, you still feel like something is missing, as if absence lived inside, as if no one really sees you. This subtle, almost invisible feeling of being present in the world yet disconnected from it is not just yours. It's more common than people say, and deeper than you might think. Have you noticed this? That even surrounded by people, even being loved by some, even being useful, productive, present, is your soul still lonely? There is a kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. It's an existential loneliness, a void that appears when what once filled you no longer does, when the conversation with the other person seems small, when affections seem shallow, when spaces, voices, looks lose their flavor. And that's not depression. It's not fragility. It's part of the path, What you are feeling is the silent collapse of the old self. Before you clung to some certainties, that love would cure everything, that finding someone would save you, that having control would bring you peace. And when these certainties begin to fall away, this space remains, a kind of emotional silence, as if the soul said, I don't want to survive anymore, but I still don't know how to live. This is the point at which many give up. They try to go back, recreate old patterns, revive old loves, repeat old cycles, because everything seems better than this emptiness, this absence that doesn't scream but weighs, that feeling of being in a place where nothing else fits. And that's why spiritual awakening can't be sold as a happy ending. It is, in fact, an uncomfortable opening. You get out of prison, yes, but for a while, it still finds no shelter. That's when you start to see yourself more clearly. But seeing clearly can be cruel, because now, all the lies you've told yourself over the years begin to crumble. You said everything was fine, but it wasn't. You smiled, but inside it was imploding. You said, I love myself, but he still allowed himself to be treated as a second option. True spirituality, the kind that truly heals, is not about instant light. It's about looking at the shadow with courage. It's about recognizing how much it still hurts to not be seen, even after looking so deeply inside. And that's exactly where you are right now. It's not regression. It's transition. It's a crossing between what you were and what is yet to be born. You feel absence because something in you is coming apart, taking off from old versions of ancient needs, of old voids that were previously filled by emotional crumbs. But now, you are no longer satisfied with little, and that's where it hurts, because before it was easier to be anything to be accepted. Now your soul no longer accepts being erased to fit into shallow spaces. So what you feel is not loneliness. It's the absence of distractions. It's the silence after the screaming stops. It's the space between old pain and real healing. You sought spirituality thinking you would find quick answers, but she handed you a mirror, and what you saw there was your emptiness. And your emptiness is not the end. It is the beginning of truth. This discomfort that doesn't go away, this restlessness that cannot be explained, it's your soul saying that it no longer accepts living half-heartedly. You are not broken. You are clean, without the masks, without the roles he once played to be loved. And that's why it feels like something is missing. In truth, what is missing is what was never real. You have awakened to a new consciousness, and when you wake up, everything that does not vibrate at the same frequency begins to disappear. People, places, thoughts, desires. That's scary, but it also liberates. You're between the lines, in the pause between the old note and the new song, on the bridge between who you were and who is being born in silence. And the most curious thing is that, at that moment, no one sees. You keep smiling, going to work, answering messages, but inside, there is a universe falling apart, an old world ending, and a new one still under construction. Maybe no one notices, but you feel it. And that's why I'm here, to remind you that this state is not a failure. It's passage. What you feel now is spiritual. It is sacred silence that prepares the ground for the soul. It is absence that cleanses, that purifies, that makes room for the new. But this new one doesn't come screaming. He whispers. And that's why so many don't listen, because they confuse absence with failure. But absence, when listened to carefully, it is the beginning of the reunion with your own essence. If you felt all of this while listening, if this text translated what you didn't even know how to explain, comment here. I recognized myself in the silence. Now, let's dig deeper, because the root of this pain that silently visits you may be somewhere you never imagined. This absence isn't a mistake. It's a process. It's the echo of your old self dying, an echo that doesn't fade overnight, because it carries with it everything you believed to be real, everything that sustained you for so long, even when it hurt. It's as if your soul is clearing the remains of a cycle that no longer has room in the new frequency that's arriving. But you still feel it, because your body and heart hold memories that your mind can't erase so quickly. You feel absence because you're disconnecting from what was illusion, and you haven't yet anchored in what is truth. And that hurts. It hurts because what was illusion also gave you some comfort. It was predictable. It was familiar. Even if it kept you small, it still provided ground. Now that ground has disappeared. You're treading in the dark, and the dark feels threatening when you haven't yet learned to trust the light that comes from within. Rumi wrote, "Separation from the beloved is the beginning of the path, but what if that beloved isn't a person? What if it's the attachment to what you believe to be love? What if it's the idealized image you've constructed of yourself, of others, of life? Separation from the beloved, then, is separation from everything that prevented you from seeing clearly, everything that prevented you from being whole, without depending on the other's reflection. What you're feeling now is part of a spiritual mourning, a silent but profound mourning. It's not mourning for someone who died, but for a part of you that can no longer live in the new space that's opening up within you. And this space, for now, is still empty. It's still waiting to be inhabited by a purer, lighter, truer consciousness. But to do so, you must pass through the dark tunnel of transition. You must embrace absence not as punishment, but as fertile ground. You must allow the old to die completely. Because only when the soul sheds everything that isn't its own does it begin to remember who it truly is. And this is where many people lose their way. Because they mistake absence for failure. They think they're regressing, when in fact, they're breaking free. Because letting go of what has shaped us for so long requires a spiritual courage few are willing to sustain. It's easier to return to the familiar, to pretend nothing has changed, to occupy ourselves with distractions, to seek new emotional addictions to avoid feeling what's crying out to be felt. But you know it's over. You've already crossed the line. You've seen what you needed to see. You've felt what you needed to feel. Now there's no going back to who you were, but you still don't know how to be who you're being born to be. And this in-between place is what we call a crossing. The spiritual root of this absence is this disconnect between the old and the new, between the conditioned self, full of fears, needs, and external validations, and the essential self, which is still awakening, but already beginning to whisper. The problem is that this whisper is fragile at first. It's subtle, almost imperceptible in the midst of the world's noise. That's why it's so important to be silent, to stop, to feel, to not run away from absence, because it's in it that the new voice reveals itself. The pain you feel today isn't about the present. It stems from old patterns that continue to be activated within you, even when everything seems different on the outside. It's as if you've moved house, but you still carry boxes full of memories that pull you back. And some of these memories aren't even yours. They're emotional legacies. They're scars from childhood, from trauma, from wounds opened by those who were also hurt. You may have already forgiven, already understood rationally, but deep down there are parts of you that still cry for not having been seen, for not having been protected, for not having been loved fully. And these parts are now coming to the surface, not to paralyze you, but to finally be embraced. Because the new you that is being born cannot arise on a foundation of unheeded pain. It needs clean ground, a clean soul. And it's at this point that awakening ceases to be a pretty concept and becomes a profound spiritual practice. Because there's no point repeating positive phrases if there are still voices inside you telling you you're not enough. You need to listen to those voices, honor them, and then, with compassion, choose not to follow them anymore. Rumi said, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." And that's it. The heart breaks. Not because you're failing, but because it's being expanded. And expansion hurts. Expansion requires something to break, something to shatter, something old to dissolve so the new can blossom. This is where you are now. You're not lost. You're between versions. You're saying goodbye to everything that once made sense, but now no longer fits in your awakened soul. And you don't yet know what will emerge. But you feel something inside is preparing, like a seed that hasn't yet sprouted, but already pulses with life within the earth. This discomfort you feel, this absence, is the womb of your new consciousness. It's a threshold state, a creative void, a kind of dark night of the soul, where you can't see the path, but you begin to sense that even in the darkness, something greater is guiding your steps. You are where you're supposed to be, even if everything inside you wants to run away, even if your body begs for answers, even if your mind questions whether everything is okay. It is, because the true spiritual path isn't recognized by immediate relief, but by the truth it awakens. If this truth touched you, if you felt like I spoke exactly to you, comment here. I'm between versions. And stay with me, because now we're going to reveal what many don't have the courage to say, what really begins to heal this absence that no one sees. No one told you that awakening doesn't bring immediate peace, because the peace you imagined wasn't peace. It was control. It was predictability, a comfort zone, the illusion that if you did everything right, you'd only experience the good side of the spiritual journey. But the truth is different. The truth is that spiritual awakening isn't a soft light shining through the window. It's a bolt of lightning, a rupture. It first tears away your certainties, your bonds, your ground. Then it leaves you naked, vulnerable, exposed to your own essence. And only then does the process of reconstruction begin. The absence you feel is not a mistake. And I repeat this because perhaps you're still fighting it, trying to fill it with answers, distractions, rational explanations. But that's not what it feeds on. It doesn't ask to be explained. It asks to be heard, with silence, with presence, with surrender. What you feel is not absence. It's sacred space opening up, a space that was once occupied by masks, stories, automatic routines, versions of yourself that needed to stay alive to please, to be accepted, to belong. Now, all of that is falling away, and what's left is space. And space is frightening because you haven't yet learned to truly inhabit it. The emptiness you feel is actually a calling. It's the ground being cleared. It's the temple being emptied to receive something that could never arrive if it were still full of noise. It's as if the soul is saying, now it's my turn to breathe. And to do so, you'll need to unlearn a lot. You'll need to unlearn how to seek outside what only springs from within. You'll need to unlearn how to run from yourself every time silence approaches. You'll need to unlearn the habit of distracting yourself with other people's pain to avoid facing your own. Because true awakening doesn't take you outside. It pulls you in. It forces you to sit with the pain, the fear, the emptiness, until you realize you're not alone, that you never were. This absence isn't loneliness. It's presence without noise. It's the moment when the soul, tired of screaming unheard, finally finds space to whisper. But to hear that whisper, you need to shed your character. You need to stop acting for the world. You need to drop the armor of someone who always needs to be okay. Because this wounded soul within you, it doesn't need answers. It needs acceptance. And therein lies the hidden key. It's not something you find outside. It's not a technique, a course, a formula. It's a silent principle, often ignored because it doesn't please the ego. Real healing begins with surrender. With surrender. When you stop fighting absence, it stops being a hole and starts becoming fertile soil. It is surrender that transforms emptiness into a cradle, that transforms pain into a seed. Because when you surrender, you stop resisting. And when you stop resisting, suffering changes form. It doesn't disappear suddenly, but it begins to teach. Absence becomes a teacher. Silence becomes a guide. Vulnerability becomes a temple. This key only reveals itself when you accept being exactly where you are. No rush to leave. No anxiety about understanding everything. Just being, feeling, breathing. And this is one of the most difficult tasks for a soul that has been taught to rush all the time. That has been conditioned to justify itself, to prove itself, to mold itself to fit into the world. But now, you don't fit anymore. And that's not a flaw. That's freedom. But freedom is also scary, because it demands presence. It demands that you become whole, even without guarantees, even without certainties, even without anyone's approval. And that requires a kind of courage that only arises when the ground disappears, when all that's left is the silence between one breath and the next. It's in this silence that the soul begins to speak, not with words, but with sensations, intuitions, subtle perceptions. That's when you begin to sense something sacred happening, even if you can't name it. That's when your heart begins to beat differently. That's when your eyes see the same world, but through a different lens, a softer lens, deeper, more real. This is the beginning of true reconnection, not with what you were told was divine, but with what within you has always been divine even when ignored. It's the beginning of intimacy with your own soul, of sincere listening, of compassion for parts of yourself you've always tried to hide, and only then does absence begin to transform. It stops being anguish and starts being peace. Not the kind of peace that takes you away from reality, but a peace that anchors you, even in chaos. A silent peace that doesn't depend on answers. That doesn't need an explanation. That simply is. And that becomes stronger the more you allow yourself to feel what comes, without resistance. Maybe you're still at the beginning of this process. Maybe you're still resisting, trying to return to what you were, trying to keep alive an identity that has already expired. But the key only turns when you decide to stop fighting the flow of your soul, when you realize that the path is not up, but down, to dive in, to sit deep with everything that hurts, and there, to breathe, to stay, to love. You don't have to run anymore. You don't have to pretend anymore. You don't have to hide from absence anymore. It didn't come to destroy you. It came to remind you of everything you are, when you're not trying to be anything. If you felt this, if something inside you seemed to have been touched while listening to these words, comment here. I allow the sacred space to open within me. Maybe you've distanced yourself from everything. Friends with whom you once shared forced laughter, empty conversations, encounters that filled your schedule but not your soul, relationships that seemed like love, but were merely silent contracts for emotional survival, distractions that filled your time just so you didn't have to listen to what lives deep inside you. Maybe you left the scene without telling anyone, feeling like you no longer fit into any of the roles you used to play. And now, outside of all this, you feel alone. But this solitude isn't a punishment. This solitude is a portal, a calling, a space of transition between the external world that artificially sustained you and the internal universe that's begging for passage. Before, you needed someone else to feel whole. You needed a message to feel cherished, a touch to believe you were loved, a constant presence to avoid facing the absence that always existed within. But now, something has changed. Life, with its silent wisdom, has called you inward. It has removed the outside voices so you can hear your own. It has silenced distractions so you can feel what you've always avoided. And that's where the discomfort begins. Because for the first time, you're face to face with what lives inside you when no one else is looking. This moment is sacred. It is in this space of silence and absence that the principle of healing begins to manifest itself in practice. Because everything that seemed to come from outside, love, acceptance, security, now needs to be cultivated from within. And this doesn't happen with pretty words. It happens with presence, with truth, with the courage to stay even when the urge to flee is overwhelming. Maybe you're experiencing this right now. Maybe you ended a relationship that no longer felt mutual. Maybe you stopped responding to messages that always led you to the same cycle of pain. Maybe you said no to what you said yes to for years just to be accepted. And now you feel a strange silence taking over your routine. A silence that, at times, is overwhelming, but at the same time, revealing, because it shows you how much you've adapted to not being alone and how much this has distanced you from yourself. This is where the key begins to turn. Because when you begin to be emotionally self-sufficient, the world stops being a validation field and becomes a mirror. You no longer need to prove anything, or seek, or beg for emotional crumbs. You begin to choose more clearly. You begin to realize what nourishes your soul and what merely drains your energy. And this clarity is liberating, but also isolating, because not everyone will understand this new you that is emerging. Maybe you've tried to explain, say you're changing, that you need silence, that you're reconnecting, but many won't understand. They'll say you've distanced yourself, that you're strange, that you're cold. But the truth is, for the first time, you're warm inside, alive, present, feeling, and that scares those who still live numb. You begin to realize that you no longer need to be everywhere with everyone, saying yes to everything, because now you feel pleasure in being with yourself, in cooking while listening to your breath, in walking aimlessly, just to observe yourself, in writing to yourself, as if you were conversing with a forgotten part of your soul. And in this simple daily routine, something begins to emerge that no relationship has ever brought: integrity, a feeling of silent completeness that doesn't depend on anyone to exist. But that doesn't mean you won't miss it. Sometimes memories of the past will visit you. You'll miss the touch, the company, the look, but you're not the same anymore. And even though you miss it, you won't go back to what hurt you, because now you understand that missing someone isn't the same as belonging, and that true love begins when you choose yourself, even when the world doesn't understand. This example I'm giving isn't to idealize solitude, but to reveal its healing power. Because only when you allow yourself to be alone do you discover what's truly yours. And when something or someone comes again, it won't be to complete you but to overflow with you. Because now you are whole. This is the healing principle applied to real life. It's not about isolating yourself forever. It's about stopping losing yourself in others. It's about breaking out of the relational stasis where you've always suppressed yourself to be accepted. It's about creating an inner space where your soul can rest, without masks, without defenses, without armor. A place where you feel at home within yourself. And it is in this space that spirituality ceases to be discourse and becomes practice, no longer as an escape, but as presence, no longer as self-help, but as self-discovery. You begin to realize that the absence that bothered you so much was actually the presence of everything that was dormant within you. And this presence now is your greatest strength. You no longer need external promises, nor emotional guarantees. You begin to love differently, to relate differently, to dream differently, because now you know you have a home within yourself, and when the soul has a place to dwell, everything changes. If you saw yourself in this, if at any point in this process you recognized yourself, comment here. Today I am my own presence. You are not lost. Despite what your mind tells you when everything seems dark, despite the late nights when silence visits you like a weight, despite the days when absence seems greater than you, it bears repeating, you are not lost. You are in transition. And transitions are not straight paths. They are spirals. They are turns that feel like repetitions, but which are taking you somewhere else. Deeper, truer, more yours. Rumi said, don't turn away. Keep your eyes on the place where the light enters. And that place, paradoxical as it may seem, is precisely where it hurts the most, because that's where the truths lie. That's where the masks fall. That's where the old die. And it's in that same place that the light enters, not through the door of perfection, but through the crack of your pain. This absence you still feel, this loneliness that insists on returning, are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are, in fact, the first signs that something very right is happening. Something that cannot be seen from the outside, but that is already beginning to pulse within. It is your soul being quietly reborn. It is your consciousness expanding silently. It is the construction of a new identity that no longer needs to rely on approval, control, or escape. You begin to realize there's a new strength within you, a strength that doesn't shout, that doesn't impose itself, but that sustains. A strength that comes from vulnerability, from surrender, from deep acceptance of the present moment. And this acceptance is revolutionary, because you've been conditioned to fight everything that hurts, to reject what bothers you, to avoid any discomfort. But now something in you chooses to stay, chooses to look, chooses to breathe into what once caused panic. And that's where the turning point begins, because what was once absence now begins to be perceived as space. What was once emptiness is now fertile ground. What was once pain is now passage. Nothing has changed outside, but everything begins to change inside. Your perspective shifts. The way you see yourself changes. The way you interpret your silences, your cycles, your falls, everything changes. Because now you understand. You are not alone. You are being prepared, ready to love more truly, to choose more consciously, to exist with more presence. Absence is teaching you this. It's cleansing your senses. It's sharpening your listening. It's removing everything that wasn't you so you can finally remember who you are. This reminder is subtle but powerful. It comes not as a cry of clarity, but as a sigh of recognition. Suddenly, you look at yourself and no longer feel that urge to fix yourself, to mold yourself, to adapt. You begin to allow yourself to be, with flaws, with doubts, with contradictory feelings. Because you understand that being whole isn't about being perfect, it's about being true. And this truth strengthens you, because it doesn't need to be hidden. It doesn't need to be justified. It simply is. And the more you align with it, the more pain loses its power. Because pain no longer needs to scream to be heard. It finds a place to exist within you, without dominating you. And that is freedom. True spiritual freedom is not the absence of pain, but the ability to inhabit it without losing yourself. You begin to remember that you are not the absence, nor the pain, nor the doubt. You are the one who feels all of this, but you are not defined by any of it. You are the space where it all happens. And this space now begins to expand. You feel it. Even if there is still fear, something new is emerging, a sense of peace that is independent of circumstances, a serenity that arises from the deep acceptance of what is. This is the turning point, when absence stops being seen as a hole to be filled and starts being recognized as a temple, a sacred place where your new essence is blossoming, an inner room where you can rest, not because everything is resolved, but because you've stopped running. You've stopped seeking outside what only arises when you find yourself, and in that encounter, you discover that you've always been here, that your light never left, that your soul was never lost. It was just waiting for you to stop, waiting for you to let go, waiting for you to silence the outside noise so it could finally speak. And when it speaks, everything changes, because it doesn't say with words. It reveals with presence. It shows with silence. It guides with lightness. You begin to trust the invisible, to respect processes, to honor the soul's timing, because now you feel something greater guiding you, not a fixed destiny, but a wisdom that dwells within, something that knows when it's time to stop, to cry, to breathe, to return to oneself, something that is unhurried but purposeful. And this purpose isn't grand in the eyes of the world. It doesn't need to be. It's grand in its subtlety. It's in the way you look at yourself with more compassion, in the way you embrace your feelings without judgment, in the way you breathe within absence and still choose to remain. This is awakening. This is presence. This is soul. And even though no one sees this movement from the outside, you feel it. You know it. Because something inside you is changing. And this change needs no explanation. It just needs space, time, silence. And you're learning to offer all of this to yourself. If, while listening to these words, something in you recognized itself, if you felt as if it had been accurately described, comment here. I am blooming in the temple of silence. If you've stayed with me this far, it's because something inside you is ready to go deeper, because only those who are truly going through it recognize the value of silence, absence, and healing that doesn't scream. And if this video touched you, welcomed you, or simply put into words something you were feeling, subscribe to the channel now. Here, each video is a mirror of pain and a breath of liberation. Leave your like as a silent sign that your soul has been touched. This helps the message reach more people who, like you, are awakening and often don't even know where to find refuge. The next video that appears on the screen is the continuation of this journey. It will take you even deeper on this path of reconnecting with your truth. Watch it now, because awakening is not the end. It's just the beginning of your real encounter.